Governor David Ige issued a 17th supplementary proclamation dated December 16, 2020, suspending Hawaii Revised Statutes, Chapter 92, public agency meetings and records, to the extent necessary to enable boards as defined in Section 92-2 to conduct meetings without any board members or members of the public physically present in the same location, among other things. The Board of Education will be holding virtual meetings until further notice. The public can still call in or log on to listen to board meetings live. The live broadcast is audio only for both board members and the public. Video of the board members and any presenters will not be broadcast. An image of the agenda will be shared on the screen. This is to reduce the amount of bandwidth that this meeting takes up and to preserve the quality of the audio. To my fellow board members, a couple of housekeeping reminders. Number one, make sure you raise your hands in WebEx to participate in the discussion and wait to be called on before speaking. Number two, please mute yourselves when you are not speaking and unmute yourselves when you are called on. Number three, please state your title and name when you participate so members of the public know which board member is speaking. Number four, put your hands down after you are done speaking. And number five, if you lose connection or experience any technical difficulties during this meeting, please contact the board staff immediately. So the time now is 9:32 a.m. and I'm calling this meeting to order. On our agenda is the approval of the meeting minutes of November 19th, 2020. Before we start discussing this agenda item, I would like to note that we have changed our approach in receiving oral testimony. Before each agenda item, we will take any public testimony relevant to that item. As usual, members of the public who signed up to testify must be logged on to WebEx using the same name they used to sign up for testimony. Board staff will call on testifiers in the order which they signed up to present oral testimony before each particular agenda item. Board staff will unmute testifiers' mics. Testifiers should test their speakers and microphones before their names are called to ensure they are working properly. Instructions on how to do so can be found on the board's website. If you are not audible because of technical issues, you will be muted and the next testifier will be called. If you are unable to resolve your technical issues, you will have the opportunity to testify at the end of the meeting. Note that the board has modified its procedures and is allowing testifiers to sign up for oral testimony until the meeting is adjourned. So people can still sign up during the meeting. However, please note that each individual may testify on a particular agenda item only once. If you are signed up to testify multiple times on the same agenda item, your name will not be called. Testifiers will have a 4-minute time limit. Again, please state your name, organization, if applicable, and the agenda item you are testifying on. A chime will sound when you have 30 seconds left, and a second chime when your testimony time expires. You will be automatically muted once your allotted time for testimony expires. I will now ask board staff to call on any testifiers who have signed up to provide oral testimony on this agenda item.
Chair Takena, there are no testifiers for this agenda item.
Okay, With the public testimony on this item being concluded, we will move on to the discussion. Again, I would like to remind board members to raise your hands on WebEx and wait for me to call on you before unmuting your microphone. When you are done speaking, lower your hand. I will continue these reminders as we go through the agenda items to help to keep us all on track. And so if there are no revisions, can I get a motion and a second to approve the minutes? Board Member Kaimana Barkasi.
Hello, Board Member Kaimana Barkasi. I move to approve the minutes for November 19, 2020.
And Board Vice Chair Kenneth Uemura.
I second the motion.
Okay, it's been moved and second. Is there any discussion? Board Member Kaimana Barkasi. Okay, his hand is raised down. Again, is there any discussion? If not, hearing no objections, the minutes will be approved by unanimous consent. Thank you. Next on the agenda is discussion items, is the presentation on the Department of Education's reorganization plan to preserve classroom instruction, temporary or permanent closure, consolidations, reorganization, restructuring, or merger of offices, programs, services, and positions. Before we take testimony on this agenda item, I would like to call upon Superintendent Christina Kishimoto, who has a statement that she would like to read from Governor Ige, and also to provide some insight on this matter. So at this time, Superintendent Kishimoto, are you available and ready?
Aloha, Chair Takeno and Vice Chair Badkase and board members and members of the public who are with us today. I know this is a very complicated and involved process, and thank everyone for your continued engagement and comments. I'd like to read a statement from Governor Ige that he approved for my reading. This is related to a press release that he just issued, that I've been notified that he just issued. His statement is such: due to the pandemic and subsequent reduction in revenues, we anticipated that the Department of Education, which is the largest generally funded department, would have to take a 10% cut to its budget. However, with additional federal funds and more optimistic revenue projections by the Council on Revenues, we are able to reset the department's target reduction from 10% down to 2.5%. This represents approximately $123 million that we can now restore to our public school classrooms so that our students can be set on the path to prosperity and success, end quote. So Chair Takeno and Vice Chair Barkasi, I represent the governor's voice in that statement. He also issued to me that I have now, right at the start of this meeting, shared with you as the chair and vice chair of the HR committee, a letter that was forwarded to me with the details that confirmed from Governor Ige that we have approximately $123 million restored to us from that program review cut. And so this is certainly very good news, and we appreciate the continued work with the governor and the budget and finance team through this difficult process. I am available after, obviously, public comment for continued discussions with you as the board leadership of this committee. Mahalo.
Thank you, Superintendent. I will now ask board staff to call on any testifiers who have signed up to provide oral testimony on this agenda item.
Mahalo, Chair Takeno. Julie Reese Oda, followed by Sherry Nakamura. Julie Reese Oda, can you hear me?
Hi, yes, I can.
Mahalo. You may proceed.
Hi, thank you. My name is Julie Reyes Oda. I'm a math teacher at Nanakuli High Intermediate School and a public school mom. I'm providing comments about agenda item 3A, presentation on department's reorg plan to preserve classroom instruction. When reviewing the superintendent's submission to the board of the impacts associated with the reduction, I want to comment that there is some consistency in the future on how the principals report. For example, Aya Elementary on page 30 has over 1 page detailing each position that's eliminated, how many stipends, how many substitute days, resources, programs, and listed impacts. Whereas Waipahu High School on page 66 lists nothing of the sort. Basically, the guy toots his own horn, says that, quote, budget restrictions significantly impact school operations, as if we don't know. And how can the Board of Ed really discuss impacts when principals do this and just expect you rubber stamp anything they ask? The ACFIN has not been shared with the teachers at our campus. I'm the chair of the School Community Council, hasn't been shared with us either. Senator Donna Mercado Kim told us in a meeting yesterday that when the Education Committee discusses money with the department, they're accused of micromanaging. The only option they had is to restrict money to the entire department. This board has been frustrated in the past when it's come to fulfilling the obligation to improve the budget. Why talk about a budget if no one has any control? But back to the reason why we're in business. When describing what the impacts fewer positions have on schools, class sizes, class offerings, combining grade levels, and providing less instructional support for kids are listed. But the problem is, that is the core business of what we do. Yet in the December board meeting, we hear the department use these descriptions when justifying the overimportance of keeping positions at non-school level departments. I see things like reductions expanding staff workloads and increasing processing time for responses, impact compliance, jeopardize safety, reductions to funding or personnel will result in not being able to provide critical services and support within their scope. Reductions to this office will result in misalignment of technology initiatives and strategies with the overall strategy, direction, vision, and goals of the department. It really shows how the department views the importance of the schools in the organization plan. Schools are there to make sure that we keep the other non-school departments in business. In light of the governor's restoration of the cut from 10% to 2.5%, I ask that all of the cuts be restored directly to the schools and not to any of the non-school level departments. Thank you.
Sherry Nakamura, followed by Corey Rosenly. Sherry, can you hear me?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Mahalo, please proceed.
Thank you. Aloha Chair Takeno and members of the committee. My name is Sherry Nakamura, Director of He'i Coalition. I'm commenting today on discussion item 3A. We're pleased to hear the announcement by the governor to restore the funds to the department. Our testimony was written with the understanding of a 10% reduction, but we feel that our comments this morning are still relevant. We're troubled to hear that the department is projecting a reduction of over 1,000 FTE positions due to the 10% budget reductions, and we agree that the impact will be extremely damaging to the schools. On a positive note, the second round of ESSER 2 funds of $184 million is on its way. We strongly advocate that the federal funds should go right back to restoring the position cuts at the school level, restoring the 10% cuts that the schools were asked to make. We present more specific suggestions on use of those funds in our testimony for the Finance and Infrastructure Committee. We would like to share an observation about the department's budget reduction analysis. When looking at the department's process of determining how to make the 10% budget reductions, we did not see a strategic guidance process on how budget cuts should be made. It appeared that the decisions were left up to each school and complex. While flexibility is good to have, perhaps it would have been better if there had been strategic parameters in place, especially when resources are so scarce. For example, there could have been recommendations like, as much as possible, classroom teachers should be maintained, or resources should be preserved for both health and safety, and teaching and learning to address our most vulnerable students. In using the $184 million or any other funds, the priority should be health and safety for all in DOE schools and maintaining quality instruction in the classroom. Thank you for this opportunity to testify.
Corey Rosenlee, followed by Susan Piccola Davis. Corey, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Please proceed.
Thank you. Good morning, board. I will say that my testimony has changed also this morning, but I think there's a very important question that still needs to be answered, either by Superintendent Kishimoto. I don't think Brian Hallett is on. The question I see about the reduction of the budget from $123 million, is this from the 10% cut of $164 million, or is this the combined 2-year cut to the department of $264 million? My first read, it looks like it is based on the $164 million, which still means that the department is looking at $141 million of cuts, and that does not include furlough costs as well. If it is the $140 million of cuts, then basically that is 86% of what the schools were asked to cut from their budgets, which still, in my rough math, basically still is leading to 688 teachers and over 1,100 DOE employees. I want to say, before we celebrate and look at that, I mean, it's good to see any money being pursued that way. But if it looks at the combination of the 2 years losses, we're still dealing potentially with a cut that is greater than what should be, and still have a devastating impact on our schools. So I know today on your agenda, you are still having the discussion item on the preserving classroom instruction. I think that question is still relevant unless somehow we are finding money for the additional $100 million that was lost for last year. Thank you.
Susan Piccola Davis. Susan, can you hear me?
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Please proceed.
I am in such strong agreement with Mr. Rosenlee's thoughts about celebrating too early for this 2.5% news. And I think that more discussion will be needed on this besides just thinking of it as good news. I strongly oppose the presentation on the Department of Education's reorganization plan to preserve classroom instruction, blah, 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 okay? Relevant questions still exist. How were the different percentages of projected FTEs reductions for complex areas determined? How were the types of position reductions determined for the complex areas? As stated earlier by a previous presenter, it seems like every one of the different complexes and the schools had no direction as to, you know, prioritizing what would be let go. I mean, there's such a disruption in the numbers. On page 7, the cuts are crippling schools by reducing school level operational funds. You're talking about losing teachers. Of course, we're not going to be able to operate as a school system. According to my thoughts on staff reductions, the process of reductions in force will be detrimental for those teachers let go, as well as those that have not been let go. This document is not something that was just put together. It is part of a long-term plan developed by the superintendent and her deputies. Some teachers have already been told that they will be let go. This leads me to believe that the process has already started. On pages 8 through 9, the RIF timeline is displayed. The month of February is designated for the Office of Talent Management to compile the list. If that is true, then how do teachers already know that they will be leaving or let go? The projected school list is created in January, another example of the plan that is already taking place. So you could say, well, we expedited the process. That is another way that teachers have been already notified of RIF. Those displaced and unable to be reassigned will end their yearly contract. As for complex by complex reduction of 10%, the students will be the ones that suffer. Teachers are already suffering because they know. Page 9 of the Finance Committee presentation. This may be preemptory. The DOE will spend $53 million of the ESSER 2 funding on awarding contracts to 5 companies to provide tutoring services. They will also spend $9.65 million. Thank you.
Susan, you still have 20 seconds. Do you yield the floor? Chair Takeno, that concludes oral testimony at this time for this agenda item.
Thank you, Gina. Just to mention, we have also received written testimony on this agenda item, or additional written testimony on this agenda item, which is publicly posted on the board's website. With public testimony on this item being concluded, we will move on to the discussion. At this time, I would like to call upon Cynthia Covell, Assistant Superintendent for the Office of Talent Management, to present on this agenda item. Assistant Superintendent Covell, are you available?
Yes, good morning, Chair Takeno. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. And Vice Chair Barkarse, members of the HR Committee, thank you very much for your time this morning. Today, the department is here to present the personnel impacts of the financial plan submitted by the complex areas and schools based on the 10% budget reduction to weighted student formula, the special education per pupil allocation, and the complex indexed complex area allocation, also referred to as ICA. You will recall that in December, the department presented to the HR Committee and separately to the Finance Committee the 10% reduction and its impacts on state level offices and programs. Today, the focus will be on the complex and school levels. Assistant Superintendent Bryant Hallett is also here, and he will be providing a presentation on the complex and school budget impacts to the FIC following the HR Committee presentation. Brian will also have with him a complex area superintendent and a principal to help answer any questions that may come up at FIC. To develop the school and complex reductions, the complex area superintendents worked with their principals who developed their annual financial plans within the parameters of the required budget reductions. The overall guidance was to preserve as much capacity as possible to provide quality educational services to our students. With the size of the budget reduction, difficult choices had to be made. The financial plans developed by the schools were shared mostly with their school communities, although we heard testimony that perhaps one school did not, but these plans were all approved by the CAS. The department will continue to analyze the financial plans, and in light of this new information, we'll also be reevaluating the restoration of any positions. The board memo reflects the summary of the school complex level inputs and shows the full-time equivalent positions that were reduced. In the aggregate, a total of 1,338 FTE positions were identified for reduction. 1,317 are at the school level and 21 at the complex areas. The personnel reductions vary by school and complex based on the individual school design plans, their personnel needs, and their current staffing. However, the impacts on the whole are detrimental to providing the quality education that our keiki deserve. The timeline for implementing the staff reductions is highlighted in the memo to provide the board and the public a view of the steps necessary to effect these reductions. The department is currently in the process of preparing the projected school list for next school year based on these potential reductions. We plan to return to the board in March to request approval of the positions identified for reduction in force. We are following the respective collective bargaining agreements to effectuate the reductions. And while the department is following these processes to prepare for the current proposed personnel reductions, if additional funding is received, the complex and school level reductions will be reevaluated, which could potentially allow schools to restore funding to some or many of the positions identified for reduction. As the superintendent has previously noted, it is a process, and as we continue to get new information and additional funds, we will adapt accordingly. Our goal is to our desire is to preserve our core mission of teaching and learning and to ensure equity. Thank you again, and I'm standing by for any questions.
Thank you, Assistant Superintendent Covell. Before we start discussion on this agenda item, I'd like to again remind committee members to raise your hands on WebEx and wait for me to call on you before unmuting your microphone. When you are done speaking, please remember to lower your hand. So at this point in time, is there any questions from committee members? Chair Payne?
Thank you, Chair Takano. This is Catherine Payne. I just wanted to follow up with Assistant Superintendent Cavell on the comment that we heard in the testimony that given the $100 million removal of department funds from the state last year, is the loss, his calculation was 86%. I think that the principals would still need to account for 86% of what they've written down in the reports, the individual school reports. Is that something that is correct in your understanding, that given the resources that they are moving forward in their academic and financial plans, they can't go back and restore 75%? They can't go back and restore that full amount. They have to consider that they're still 86% down.
Chair Payne, this is Cindy. Our quick calculation based on hearing the testimony is that that is correct. The 86%.
Okay, thank you. Then I just had one kind of more of a comment that also came from testimony and from my awareness of what kinds of conversations are going on and the presentation. When I see that schools are cutting health and PE, and the arts, and many programs that support students, particularly safety and counseling and after school things. And I do understand if there's no money, there truly is no money, which makes it more critical that we make sure that we advocate for these resources. But to not provide health and PE instruction in some schools, I think would be a violation of board policy and some of the other things too, as I was looking through. I'm not sure how we can accommodate all the policies we have of what we expect for students to have provided to them in our schools if these cuts are sustained. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair Payne. We at the state level are continuing the analysis of the cuts, and we'll continue that with CASs as we follow up and to keep their programs balanced. With the magnitude of the dollars that were associated with this cut, really difficult decisions had to be made, and certainly you point out the piece that is also critical to balance the education for students. So we will be following up with CASs again and asking questions and and making sure that we have a balance as much as possible given the funding.
Thank you.
Board Member Maggie Cox, followed by Board Member Lynn Fallon. Board Member Cox.
Thank you, Chair. This is Maggie Cox from Kauai. First, I want to say that I'm hoping we're going to get different numbers coming up in the FIC committee with this change. But I want to make it very clear, at least from my point of view, that the board needs to be making sure that the department and everyone knows that we think no matter what the cuts are, we need to be looking at personnel first and stuff later. As I went through some of the things they're talking about, schools are talking about, well, they need to replace some computers and they need to, get certain software and so forth. To me, teachers have skills, and for years they didn't have all of this equipment and all these extra things. So we're going to have to depend on our teaching skills to help our students. So if it's very clear that stuff is not a first priority for us and that we're expecting that whatever it is we do, we make sure that we're not piling up and making the class sizes so large. I in my experience, I had to have a class with 40 some kids. You don't do a good job with any of them. And when we looked at all of the numbers of kids falling behind, I don't see how we can possibly tutor all of those. So what we need to have is if kids are behind and already we're going to be cutting positions, then the class sizes are larger. So we're going to be making kids fall more behind. So whatever it is that the department and the directions to the schools, because yes, schools need to make their decisions, but they need to understand that we need to keep as many of our licensed teachers and especially our SPED teachers so that we can use those skills to help the kids move. Now, I understand on some of the schools talked about making sure they had software for credit recovery because I'm very concerned about this year's seniors. So whatever it is we do, we need to make sure that we're trying to help our seniors. But more than that, the schools, the principals, we need to understand that the priority is for personnel, not stuff. Thank you very much. I yield.
Thank you, Board Member Cox. This is Cindy. We completely agree with your statement and assessment, and these ongoing discussions will continue. We do support our principals, and they're making thoughtful discussions based on their student population, and we'll continue to work with them and their CASs as we move forward. These additional funds will certainly help us in this area, but we agree the personnel piece is critical to providing the support to the students that they need.
Board Member Lynn Fallon.
Thank you, Chair. Board Member Lynn Fallon. I just want to underscore what Board Member Cox just articulated, that what the priority is from the board's perspective in terms of personnel cuts and how important it is to restore, especially for me, any that do the direct instruction to students. So going forward in providing guidance to the schools, I urge you to be very clear and provide that kind of guidance to the schools on behalf of the board. In looking at some of the information that was provided for the 10% cut, some of the more detailed information that is helpful to me as a board member in looking at policies and making decisions, more specifically to the direct instruction area, of the total number of cuts, I'm very interested. I know that 798.5 of them were teachers. It would have been helpful to me to know how many were K-12, how many were SPED, and how many were ALC and juvenile justice, because you describe them generally, but there's no information, because that helps us understand what the impact is to each of those areas. There's also an area, I believe, related to adult education and the cuts there. And so going forward, as we begin to think, and the legislature begins to think about prioritizing some of those areas, that would be really helpful. I know during the hearing on WAM last week, there were concerns raised about ALC. So that's why I brought that up. The other area which Board Member Cox mentioned had to do with class size. And so if we assume that the enrollment will be about the same next school year, with the cuts, it would be really helpful to know what the impact is to class size. Now, there's kind of the statewide by middle school, elementary, and high school level. So it may vary, and so one figure would be helpful. It'd be real interesting to know by those areas how the cut might impact the class size. So for example, if you take the big number and you begin to break it down by school, some of the schools and complexes indicated that it's going to impact class size. And so from a school perspective, which is where we're focusing our concern, if a school says it's going to increase class size, it'd be interesting to know kind of what that would look like. And also the kinds of cuts programmatically, whether it's PE, what specific programs might be cut. I think either high school or at all levels. The other area that has come up had to do with health and safety, and maybe this is more of a budget committee discussion, so I will defer questions in that area. I yield. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Board Member Fallon. This is Cindy again. With regard to the level of detail on the K-12, the SPED, the ALC piece, and the juvenile justice, as we get more granular on the actual positions and as things change with additional funding, we'll be able to come back to you and provide you more of that detail. Same with the class size. Given there's nearly 800 teacher positions currently expected to change with additional funding, it will change that equation. So certainly class size and then the specifics on the positions and impact that get cut will be something that we'll be able to provide to you as the details become clearer moving forward.
Thank you. I yield.
Thank you, Board Member Fallon. Board Member Bruce Voss.
Thank you, Chair. As some of the testifiers said, we need to remain vigilant on the funding because the Council on Revenues doesn't meet until early March, and the legislative budget likely won't be finalized until at least mid-April. But make no mistake, this letter and announcement from the governor this morning is very good news. I thank the governor for his continuing commitment to education. If the legislature follows the governor's lead on this $120 million restored to the budget, together with the roughly $54 million that the superintendent is proposing set aside from the ESSA funds from Congress, would appear to be enough, at least to me, to cover the cuts to EDN 100, the WSF funds, and potentially eliminate staffing cuts at the school level for the next biennium. But there's still tremendous uncertainty at the school level and a lot of work that would create by the principals because they would obviously have to completely redo their financial plans. So Cindy and or the superintendent, could you please explain to us and the public how this impacts the schedule and when the principals would be redoing their financial plans if this money is confirmed, and when the uncertainty to the staff can be alleviated.
Thank you, Board Member Voss. We are discussing that. Superintendent gave the CASs a heads up that we're going to have to be looking at the financial plans again and working with Brian and Hallett and his team and OTM together. We have a timeline that we typically follow for posting vacant teacher positions. And so we'll have to look at that and talk to our HSTA partners to see if there's any adjustment needed to the TATP timeline. But certainly the first step is going to go back to looking at the school's plans and what they are going to be able to restore, and then adjust our timelines accordingly.
So, Cindy, will the principals be basically beginning this process now? Because I mean, some of the testifiers talked about, some teachers have been told or believe they've been told that they might be terminated, and that creates uncertainty at the school level and certainly doesn't help them, in their instruction, to our students. So, is the process hopefully going to begin now to at least conceptually redo the financial plans to potentially take away part, if not all, of the staffing cuts at the school level?
Absolutely. We've been in those discussions. We have the FIC coming up next. So some of the way ahead will be based on the conversations with the FIC as well. But certainly, Dr. Kishimoto wants to set a date and a goal for this so that the principals are clear on what they're being asked to look at and show that. So we have been thinking in terms of the Office of Talent Management of the steps that would be needed to reopen the discussion with the financial plans and then the steps following.
Thank you, Cindy. I yield, Chair.
Thank you, Board Member Voss. Board Member Fallon, you still have your hand up. Do you have another question? Or
No, I don't. Sorry.
okay. Board Member Catherine Payne.
Thank you, Chair. This is Catherine Payne. I just wanted to kind of pick up on a comment that Board Member Voss made, and again, what Board Member Cox made regarding the importance of the people in the schools and the uncertainty that they are facing. We have quite a bit of testimony that was written, and we have a lot of informal conversations, I think, that are coming to all the board members. From some folks, I have heard that the first they knew that their position, because some were very, very specific, was made known to them as being cut was when they saw the information posted on our website as a response to the board's questions. So as Board Member Voss said, this caused a lot of turmoil and upset in the field. So I would ask that you talk to the principals about really making sure that they are in communication with their staff before things are publicly shared. It's just, people are in so much trauma right now anyway, that I think our school leaders have to be very sensitive to this, because ultimately, when we hurt the people in the classroom, that is not good for our kids. And the idea of stuff versus people, I really appreciated Board Member Cox's comments about that, because as we talk about people who are being cut, many of the cuts are not just to teachers in schools, but to the support staff that are really critical. And when I see that all room cleaners are being cut and custodial supplies are being cut at a time when we're having to be extra cautious about cleanliness, I think that is a huge concern also. So again, I know there's a finite budget, and I know that that number changes all the time, but everyone, including the people who are hearing us in the community, really need to make sure that the advocacy for funding for our schools is a top consideration. And we do appreciate the governor's restoration of some of the funds. And I know that there was a lot of work with board members and with the superintendent in letting him know how important this was. So thank you for that. But this is still a big concern, and we cannot cut so many things from students' experiences of school. Thank you. I yield.
Thank you, Chair Payne. Again, the department completely agrees with your sentiment, and employees are valued and respected, and this is difficult to go back and forth. Many principals did have conversations. There is a process with the classified employees that they get written notification 90 days before. So there may not have been specific positions discussed or targeted with the classified employees, but communications are critical. And I know many of our principals are having those conversations as they've checked in with the Office of Talent Management on how to have some of these conversations. And so we'll keep up the communications, we'll improve certainly where we can. And just thankful that we are seeing some relief and hopefully more. So thank you, Chair Payne.
Board Member Kenneth Uemura.
Chair Takeno, thank you. I don't have any specific questions, and I wanted to give the other board members an opportunity to ask their questions. But if you recall, at the December 17th, 2020 HR committee meeting, I shared my feelings on what the committee should see in the form of a reorganization plan that results in a leaner, more efficient, and effective Department of Education that rises to the challenge of preserving our core mission of teaching and learning to ensure equity. A reorganization plan that reflects reduced department funding triggered by the COVID pandemic. I'd also asked that the department's reorganization plan be put on a future agenda for consideration by the committee. The agenda topic is clear as to what the expectation of the presentation be, and it is the presentation of Department of Education reorganization plan to preserve classroom instruction, temporary or permanent closure, consolidations, reorganizations, restructuring or merger of offices, programs, services, and positions for complex area and school levels. What we heard today was positions for complex area and school levels, but not in the context of a reorganization plan. I believe this is the third time that this topic has been agendized, and unfortunately, the materials presented does not address the reorganization of the department to address declining revenues and reduction of expenses. Perhaps I was not clear in my reasons for advocating for a reorganization of the department. So let me be clear. Department and board must face the reality that the state revenue trend going forward is less than what it would normally be pre-COVID, and that federal assistance money that will be used to help fill the gap between the normal state revenue will end. When the federal aid stops, a funding cliff emerges where the department needs to adjust to new reduced revenue patterns and new expenses going forward. The funding cliff is a loss of federal funds that fill the revenue gap. So it's temporary. It's going to come back. That gap, that cliff is going to come back. Unfortunately, Hawaii's reliance on tourism has generated a larger funding cliff than what has been experienced in other states. So what does this all mean? The state and department will have ongoing challenges of reduced revenues, and we have to make do with what is available. Yet, yes, it has been reported numerous times that the cuts will have a detrimental impact on our schools. We cannot be satisfied with explaining away the reductions and its impact because our students will be the ones that suffer if we don't act in a prudent manner. To me, the focus should be on being proactive and requiring the superintendent to discuss with the board how the department will reorganize the department to meet the challenges imposed by the pandemic. We need to adapt to the situation before us, knowing that reduced funding will force us to look at how we are educating our students. It will not be the same. It is fine to see how the department is reducing FTEs and the impact it has on the department's capacity to continue to provide quality educational service to our students and student support service. But in what context is the committee reviewing the reductions? Are the reductions temporary or permanent? I would find the reductions more palatable if I knew that was part of a restructuring plan rather than just reductions to meet the 10% budget requirement. We are faced with a funding clip that will require permanent changes to how the department is organized. And we heard today the 123 million is really thankful to the government to reduce a 10%, 164 million, but we still have a $41 million shortfall. Also, there's another bucket of 100.2 million that was taken back in July that affected all of our EDN categories. And then we have the underfunded categories that are close to 95 million. So the 123 million, as correctly as Member Bruce Voss had mentioned, we cannot be complacent in how we look at it. We cannot celebrate this. We have to look forward. We have to prepare ourselves to the fact that our funding levels will be less, and we have to have a leaner and more efficient department. So Chair Takeno, thank you for letting me stand on my platform again, but I am an advocate of this, and I'll continue to say this as we go forward. So thank you. I yield the floor.
Thank you, Board Member Kenneth Uemura. Assistant Superintendent Covell, would you like to comment on Board Member Uemura's statement?
Absolutely. Thank you, Chair Takeno and Board Member Uemura. I guess I understand completely. You have brought up reorganization previously. The base budget will affect how we go moving forward. And I just want to assure you that we have made incremental consolidations and reorganizations. There is a process for reorganizations within the department, and part of that has to do with consulting again with the unions of the positions that become affected when you do the reorg. So we've talked about the transportation reorganization. We have the Office of Facilities looking at a bigger reorg that's going to be coming forward as soon as we understand actually the base budget there. We have our technology department looking at digital and distance learning and how that's causing a reorg within their department. So we have a couple of big ones that are coming forward, but incrementally and continuously, we have reorged in small pieces at a time to adapt to the changes that come our way and to rebalance. So to take a position that maybe no longer is needed and repurpose that for a new requirement so we don't have to request additional FTE. So we consistently, in my office, are looking with the assistant superintendents at ways that they can be more efficient in their positions, and there's constant motion. So those are maybe mini reorganizations, but we bring those to the board incrementally after the proper planning is done and the consultation process with the unions. We have work to do to continue to do this. I totally understand that, and we will. But again, as the base budget changes and what gets put back into certain areas, that'll help us to understand which positions are available and how we might go forward with future reorganizations.
Thank you, Assistant Superintendent Covell. Board Member Kenneth Waymore.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Cindy. And I guess the issue I have is what I'm looking for is a strategic look at how the department look forward. And I think what you're telling me is that you're looking at the budgets first and then figuring out how you're going to reorganize to that. And that's really the opposite of what you should be doing. Strategically, you should be looking from the top down and with your mission and core and see how you're going to do that, and then create a budget around that and see where we are. Because you may find that the budget that we're looking at to really support the new department will be less than what we have now. But to do it the way you're doing it, I think you're kind of doing it backwards, because you cannot do it in isolation. You got to do it in totality. So, and so the board should not be looking at reorganizations of individual departments when we don't have a look at the total. And so I'm not in agreement to what you're saying. And I actually look at it the opposite way. And so it's, to me, it's a backwards look. Chair, I yield the floor.
Thank you. Can I just make one additional comment? We actually do look at it both ways. So we know our strategy and our vision. And then as new requirements come up, we look at how we're going to build those into our capacity by doing reorganizations. So it's not simply a budget, how are we going to fit these positions within this budget, but it is a strategy and looking at where we're going with, again, with COVID, everything obviously has changed, the way we have to proceed with our safety and health measures, et cetera. But it is a top down and bottom up look. We did a significant deep dive with the state level when we looked at the 10% reduction. Every assistant superintendent looked at all of their positions and considered moving different branches here and there based on the strategy and not just the dollar amount. So, you know, I'll use Heidi Armstrong, for example, looking at her way her people were allocated and organized within the Office of Student Support Services to best support what we needed for the special education students and the EL learners, given COVID and other factors. So, so it is strategy driven, but it also takes into account how much money we have for the positions and what our people are capable of doing, so that we have to factor training in if it's a new skill set that they don't have. I hope that addresses it a little more clearly.
This is Dr. Kishimoto. I just want to add that the board also had gone through a process with me around reorganizing the department around 7 key departments, and we made some changes to combine 2 departments. And we also identified a major priority around modernizing our systems. Now we were obviously faced with COVID and all the new impacts of COVID. And so our intention was still to go through that reorganization work that we've previously talked about, related to OFO being a major lift in terms of modernizing that area and restructuring around how that work has to happen, especially with changes with capacity and capacity needs there and new demands. And IT was also in the middle of its reorg, which has not come back to the board, but the board did receive several reports from A.S. Connor about the new structure that we've been putting in place around everything from data security to devices to our infrastructure to run our business systems and so forth. So we're still in that progress. We're still in progress of that 4-year reorganization that we've been under. I think if you would like us to come back and present kind of where we are with that overall reorganization, we can do so in light of COVID. But I was not intending on changing the progression we're making, because we have so much system modernization we're doing as part of improving how we are doing our work. We've already reorganized around those 7 key departments and around pushing more funds into schools. That was part of that work. And now we're really looking at COVID impacts and impacts on not only IT demands, but also on instructional quality and instructional infrastructure demands. So that's where we are in that. If there are some new goals the department wants to, I'm sorry, if there are some new goals that the board, whether through HR committee and or FIC committee wants to set around other considerations that aren't built into that reorg timeline, then we should set some time for that. But we're really focused on IT and OFO next and our modernization work of FMS and then time and leave following that as part of the backbone in terms of our business functions to support the organization of how we do our work.
Yeah, thank you, Superintendent. And I think, one of the comments I made at the last meeting was the COVID environment really drives a lot of the businesses in our community and across the nation, and we're looking at how they do things. And so I'm expecting the department to do the same thing and not have the COVID as an excuse or a reason why you're not doing things. And so in order for us to take a look at your reorganization plan, we need to look at it in total. To give us the IT plan and the FMS plan separately, when we don't know what the total impact is to the department, it's really not going to fly. I think if you're going to give us a reorganization plan, you need to start from the top and give us your vision as how you see the department going forward, a leaner and more streamlined department and meeting your goals. And your goals may change, but we need to know that. And then you can structure your plan under that. So when you do your presentations, all of those reorganizations then kind of adhere to your plan. This is the reason you're doing this is because of this. The reason why you're streamlining in this area is because of this. Right now, it's unfair to the board to look at things piecemeal because we don't know what the final product is. We don't know where you want to end up with. So what I would suggest is for you, if the chair agrees, is to present on a high level exactly what is the strategic reorganization plan that you are then reorganizing your departments to. That's where I think the discussion starts, but to have this on the agenda another time and then not adhere to what the topic is and not present materials to support that, I think is a disservice to us. So Chair, that was my comments, and I appreciate Cindy's and Christina's reaction to that. But obviously, as you know from my comments, I really don't agree with the approach that's been taken and the results that we are getting.
Thank you, Board Member Kenneth Uemura. Assistant Superintendent Covell or Superintendent Kishimoto, do you want to comment on Board Member Uemura's comments?
Thank you, Chair. This is again Superintendent Kishimoto. I, about a year or 2 years into my arriving, did present a reorg to the board. I did not intend on doing another reorg. We are going through the current process of the plan that I provided. The process that I'm understanding was asked for by this committee was that we should be evaluating whether the COVID crisis and the financial crisis as a result is forcing our hand around reorganizing differently. Because there are so many balls up in the air still around what our base budget is, the approach I'm using is to just systematically go through that decision-making structure with the board, with the leadership, and with the legislature as we get more clarity. Otherwise, I do feel it would be disruptive to be proposing any kind of reorganization without clarity about our base budget moving forward. Because we did already talk about the reorg, and it's because as a result of the economic crisis, not because we would typically do reorgs based on budget first. And so we're in the midst of that. And I think if the HR leadership would like us to revisit that reorg, or then certainly we can do so, but that is what we've been doing. And it's the impact of COVID on our IT demand and infrastructure for instruction, and the impact of COVID on our stability of funding, and on our progress being made on modernization. Those are my high-level priorities, because those are huge impacts on the organization right now. And so I was not proposing to do any additional reorg. Right now, we're walking through the current reorg that had originally been proposed. And that's really about aligning IT again, and OFO, the other big area that needs to be done. So we've already done the reorg of OSIT and OSSS, the Student Support Services. We've done some of the reorg around OSIP, around really shoring up the data side of that for our strategic plan. So those three departments have gone through their changes already in the last 3 years. And now we're rolling through the other two departments, again, based on that initial reorg of the state office on the 7 departments in support of our school empowerment model, and schools working on their school designs. And of course, there's been lots of interruption there based on funding and the COVID crisis. So I think I would need some direction about whether we're saying we're going back and restructuring and looking at whether we should restructure the whole HIDOE. I was not thinking we need to, or I as a superintendent have not proposed that we should do that. I think we have very solid changes and department adjustments that we've made. And during that process, Chair, we have reduced the size of state office with that goal of prioritizing funds to schools. Again, in the last 2 years, we are the nation's smallest SEA's LEA because of that value statement that the board and I worked on about three and a half years ago. So again, I'll take the guidance from Chair and Vice Chair around whether you want to revisit this on a whole, or whether there are specific kind of guiding questions that we can talk about that can help structure the kind of revisiting of the infrastructure you want me to do in terms of the holistic structure of the DOE.
Thank you, Superintendent. Board Member Ken Uemura, followed by Board Member Lynn Fowler.
Yeah, thank you, Superintendent. And so I may not have been as clear as I needed to be, but 2 years into your into being a superintendent, doing your reorganization, what I'm asking you to do is look at your reorganization, look at the BOE in view of the COVID pandemic. Now, the COVID pandemic was not in place when you decided to reduce some of your offices. You need to relook at that, and you need to relook at that in totality. So for you to say that these reorganization is okay now, because I did it 2 or 3 years ago, continuously in different departments, and then you have the COVID hit and you're going, it's still okay. And so it may well be, Superintendent, but I think the board needs to have some clarity as to whether it is okay. Do we need all of the state agency offices? Can we combine programs? Taking a look at it through the lens of today, not of 2 or 3 years ago. So that would be my preference. I mean, asking questions is fine, but I think it's really your responsibility to have that forward look that the board is looking for. So if you're telling us, or you're telling me right now that you don't intend to do that, then I would have a problem with that, because I am very concerned about how we look like in this COVID environment. And so, Chair, I know Lynn is waiting, so I've taken enough time of the committees, but I think you know where I stand, and so I'll yield at this time.
Thank you, Board Member Uemura. Board Member Fallon?
Thank you, Chair. Lynn Fallon, Board Member. Superintendent, you made a comment about kind of a request about what might be missing from the information that the board decided on years ago. I think Board Member Uemura clarified kind of what his specific concerns and interests are. For me, and I'm not sure where in the reorg plan this would be addressed, but what is missing for me is impact. In other words, as we reorganize and move the deck chairs and refocus our roles and combine and consolidate to be more efficient and effective, what's unclear, at least starting with the business and administrative process side, which supports the organization at the school level and ultimately the system able to impact students in a positive way, has to do with metrics around impact. So by consolidating, for example, by consolidating or streamlining and modernizing through IT, through a COVID lens, if you will, what will be the change? Not so much from process, but from impact. So that's an area that I think we continue to have discussions about. And that would relate to, the tri-level roles and responsibilities and how modernization affects that and so forth. So that's my comment and my response to your request. Thank you. I yield.
Thank you, Board Member Fallon. Any other committee members? Board Member Kilinamao?
Aloha, Board Member Nama'u here. I find this discussion very fascinating because I can see the viewpoints from my colleagues as well as where the superintendent is coming from. Superintendent, I know that you've been working very diligently, and you had specific goals when you first became our superintendent. And I believe that the reorganization plan that you had was a very good one. And you have been going through that process, and I can see the value of it. And I can see you have made great changes. And I see how that you have been consolidating and trying especially to give monies back to the schools because you feel that that's really important. So you've reduced, you know, we're always defending because people are saying we're always so top heavy, and we always have to try to defend your particular central organization that's going on. I know that you're trying hard to make it a lot more efficient. But I can also understand where some of my colleagues are coming from. We're in a new time here. It's COVID. And we have been dealt some very difficult circumstances now. And unfortunately, I also don't see that we're going to be coming back economically any quicker. We're relying so much on our tourism to help bail us out. And so the legislature has to deal with so many issues in trying to find monies to keep all that's happening in our government to keep moving forward, and especially for our schools. So it's very dire and it's very critical, and we really do need to think differently about how we can approach and how we can make things better. So although, you know, the reorg on the grander scale needs to continue to move forward, and I know that there are other departments that still need to continue to make things happen for themselves, and IT, for example, and facilities, et cetera, you know, they're still on track for their own considerations. I think we also need to be very mindful that we are in a new time. COVID has created such chaos. We have budgets that need to be dealt with. We have to find additional funds. How are we going to do that? And the best way that we can try to get additional funds is to get monies better, use our monies more wisely, is to try to figure out different ways that we can do things better. So if it means like consolidating schools or departments or whatever, I think we also have to be aware of all the other kinds of issues that are available to us. So I think, you know, you're asking for some guidance from us, and I'm just saying that somehow we have to figure out how to get all hands on deck to make this happen. And I also think that there might be opportunities, if you can, if there's other opportunities to reach down further into the organization. I know you have this tri-level situation where you have the central office and the complex superintendents as well as the principals. But I think we need to go a little bit further down, and that's to talk to the teachers as well. And I'm all about the community reach out to, and I know you've reached out to community, but I think we also need to hear from the teachers as well. So if there's a way that we can get another layer of input from those individuals, that would be great. So I know the task is great. I know it's difficult, but if there's somehow that we can continue to continue with the reorg that you have on the larger scale, but also to be mindful that we do have to look at things differently. There is not going to be funds that are going to come readily to us. It's going to take a long time before our economy will recover. And we have to think something strategically in the short term as to how we can support the schools better in the short run. That's the only comments that I have. Mahalo.
Thank you, Board Member Nama'u. Any other committee members have questions? Okay, if not, I do have some few comments, and we're running pretty close to the 11 o'clock hour, and we do have a recommendation for action. But Superintendent, listening to the comments of the board members, I think we're talking about the same things, but there could be a disconnect on the overall approach and strategic, I guess, plans. I think what needs to be done, in, I guess, what support of what Board Member Uemura is saying is, there is a reorganization based off what you are saying that's ongoing right now, based on 2 years ago where you were looking at 7 key areas. But what we're asking is, in light of what's to come in the future with the budgetary cuts, the question is, are these now relevant and do they need to be revisited? And while I acknowledge and recognize that reorgs will need to go through the consultation process with the various stakeholders, I think what needs to be done is, if the department can provide the board with just a very overall look on what the objectives, the desired outcomes, and the overall plan to streamline the department and make it more efficient. So as these reorgs come to the board, you can point out that based on today, January 21st, 2021, because of the potential budgetary impacts that will be forthcoming in the years to come, we are restructuring, right? Consolidating, reorganizing, whatever it is, in light of the potential impacts, right? And of course, with the key focus to preserve classroom instruction or prevent as much as possible any type of cuts down to the school level. So, you're asking, what would be expected of the board. I think what's coming out today is pretty clear what the board is expecting now. I mean, if you have a plan, you should revisit it and you should align it with the new metrics as to what will be the objectives going forward, with, again, what board member Uemura is saying, a potential fiscal cliff within the next 2 years. How will you adjust to that in the years going out? Secondly, when the schools go back and revisit their budget, I think there were there's a lot of testimony on the fact that there should be some consistency in the reporting. There should be some distinctive outline process, parameters, basically focusing on what type of recommendations they should be looking at first, or priorities. And I think that needs to be done in light of the situation we are in. I think in prior requests and prior, environments, that would not be necessary. But I think for this particular matter, right, that would be essential. I think the schools should get more or less a prescriptive directive of what needs to be reviewed and how it needs to be reported. And that way, I think we would alleviate some of the miscommunication and confusion on how these reports are coming back up. So with those comments, I ask any board members if they have any further before we move on to the next agenda item. Okay, so having seen no hands raised, do you understand what I guess I conveyed right now, Superintendent?
Thank you, Chair. I will go back and look at how we represent the move forward. All of this is, in fact, the COVID crisis and the health crisis is informing shifts that we are making to our plans, such as revisiting how we deliver instruction. That's not causing a reorg of OSID that we've already done, but it is causing a relook at the priorities that are driving the work there and how that department is working hand in hand with OIT's technology team because of the heavier reliance on instructional technology now. So yes, we can summarize where we are with that, and with the modernization work that was the priorities, and any recommendations moving forward based on the fiscal outlook in the out years in terms of how that is going to or may impact how we have to deliver our work and think about our structure for that. But again, this has not, I want to reiterate, this kind of this looking at our infrastructure, our governance structure, our decision-making structure, that's a living process. Every year we look at that, and certainly during the COVID health pandemic, where we've had to deliver training differently, shift monies to additional nurses. So yes, we continue to make those changes in real time and have shown our responsiveness. We can capture that in terms of where we are now and where we are making recommendations for any reorganizations based on that economic projection and also the changes to our core work. So yes, I think we're all saying the same thing in terms of the priority that our work and our organization has to reflect our economic outlook and the new and changing priorities as a result of the COVID crisis. And so we are on the same page that is an important matter that we will continue to address. We can work together on how that gets represented so that it answers the questions the board has now about that reorganization. I think how the board may be talking about reorganization and how I'm talking about reorganization is where we had some differences. Again, because again, just more an interpretation, not in fundamentally being on the same page. So yes, we can certainly be responsive to you on that and bring something back that has that future-facing look and set of recommendations around our overall organization for the department. Mahalo, Chair.
Superintendent, when can we expect that? Because the feeling I've got is we're not on the same page. So we got to get there sooner rather than later. So when can we be given a review of the overall strategic plan for any type of reorganization?
So Chair, I think that it would make most sense for us to come back in April after we've had more of the financials. Our focus right now is certainly the budget process, the vaccines, the bringing more students back into classrooms, the continued PD we need to do, and what this all means to our overall design. So, I think as we look at the work at hand and look at the impact and projections of even the Council on Revenues as they represent their position in March, then April would make sense to come back to have this conversation that pulls this all together, if that's acceptable to the chair.
So again, it goes to what Board Member Uemura has been speaking about, that he's looking at something, and I think this committee would be interested in viewing something that is not reactionary to a budgetary cut, but more proactive and forward thinking in, are there areas that need to be streamlined now? Like, for example, the next agenda item is a reorg of the Office of Fiscal Services and Accounting Services branch. Is this relevant to even listen to at this time when we don't even have an overall arcing targets that was shared with the board and I guess agreed to? So that's what I'm looking at, that, you're saying that there are these reorgs in process, but are they still relevant knowing what this committee is seeking as the, I guess, the guidance or what the objectives will be going forward? I don't want something in April to be reflective of, okay, because of the budgetary cuts, we're going to adjust to this. I think what Board Member Uemura is saying is we want to know whether or not there are operational efficiencies that can be done now, that can be done today, irrespective of that. And, you know, basically, are you performing at your optimal level? And if not, then the question could be, could there be a reorganization, a consolidation, a merger or something to make it more efficient, irrespective of what's to come through the budget? Can that be also presented earlier? Then we can also understand what's going to come forward to, like, again, a budgetary impact. But right now we're looking at just a organizational structure review as to whether or not you are structured to perform optimal operations.
So, Chair, I would just reiterate, I think even within the context of bandwidth and what we need to focus on now, and what we're focusing on now that is helping to inform what we are seeing may be long-term impacts of COVID and the economic crisis. Not that we're planning only based on the budget, which is why I said we were not looking for an overall reorg because of the now budget crisis. We were continuing the work and the modernization and looking at the added impact and what we're learning from the COVID situation. How certain things play out during the spring semester, such as related to not only the finances, but how quickly we can get vaccines out, whether or not the positivity rate continues to be fairly controlled in the state, or whether we get impacted by the other strands of viruses. There are a lot of things that are, again, still up in the air that are impacting both the short term and will certainly impact the long term. And which is why I think it is early to say we have these major changes to the long term. We're really making modifications to the operational and programming structure based on what we're learning now about those areas we need to be continuously more efficient on, and also more focused on and prioritize. And of course, budget will impact that. And so, you know, I think April is a good time period to come back for that. Right now, we're looking at, you know, what we're learning about, you know, what the continued decisions will be based on the modification that the governor has noted today to his executive budget, how the legislature is going to work with that executive budget and what additional changes they're going to impose or change on us. So there's still nothing certain about our budget, even for short-term planning. And that definitely informs our longer-term structural reorgs. But we do know with certainty that there are some areas that have to be improved and streamlined and redefined, which is why I had mentioned that our move forward work is really around the modernization, the IT, because that impacts the business side of the house and the instructional side of the house, and on facilities with a new law that's been passed around our school facilities board that is going to be stood up, and we're waiting to find out whether that's going to be, you know, go live now or whether that's going to be delayed because of the fiscal crisis, and that will have huge implications on the organization of facilities. And so those are all the kind of components that go into how we think about our overall organization.
You know, I have additional questions and comments, but I'm going to give the floor now to Board Member Kenneth Uemura, and I'll come back.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Superintendent, for your response. I just wanted to make just a few comments that I want to make certain that everybody's clear is that, you know, a reorganization plan, there's a reason why you do that. So, you know, two or 3 years ago, you did a reorganization of your, I guess, your state agency. I'm not sure what the reason for that was. But what we're asking for is a reorganization plan. And the reason to do that is because of our, we know that our funding will be less than what it is. So that, so if you look at it, that's, star in the sky and how we're going to get there, how we're going to get a department to there. And another thing that's critical here that you should understand, and I know it was mentioned, and I didn't agree with what was said, but the plan drives the budget. The budget doesn't drive the plan. In other words, anytime you do a strategic plan, you then you build a budget around the plan. And then you figure out if you have the financial resources an operating plan to complete those budgets. So you cannot use the budget and say, whether I'm waiting for the budget so that I can determine how we're going to go forward and streamline it. It's the reverse. You have to have a plan in place so you can determine how much money you need to go forward. And then you can tweak it that way. And that's the forward thinking numbers and plan that I'm looking for. So unless you can do it that way, I mean, I know the reason. The reason for not doing it quickly is because of the issues you just mentioned, but I don't look at that as being issues because you should be doing it the reverse way. And that's why I'm saying that that what is the chair is asking for and agree what he has mentioned is actually pretty easy for you to do with your team, to come up with just a general strategic outlook of how you're going to meet that. And I wanted to mention something else, how the reorganization plan comes into play. I know, I think Chair Payne brought this up, and a lot of the testimonies were the cuts at the school levels would deal with health and PE. And that really shows to me that there was no guidance given to the schools and the CASs and the principals. Well, a reorganization plan with a streamlined look would give them the guidance that they need. So a lot of times when I listen to the comments and the presentations, I have no backstop to compare it to. I don't know why you guys are doing things. And so that's why I'm really advocating for this. And it's an opportunity for us to really be a forward-thinking department and board. So Chair, I, again, for the final time, I'm going to yield the floor. Thank you.
Thank you, Board Member Uemura. Superintendent, I'm more inclined to see something presented prior to April. So we're looking at something like basically a reorg on how you plan to, I guess, again, streamline and make the department more efficient. And they're like what Board Member Uemura says, if the budgetary numbers don't work out, we can always go back and revisit it. But, I'd rather look at what is here now and start preparing for that versus what can or cannot be expected. I think we need to move more swiftly now because of the fact that things are going to be ever changing. We need to be flexible, but we still need to provide leadership and guidance as well as information to the board so that we can make sound decisions. So I think April is just pushing it too far out. I'm looking for something by at least late February. So in the third week of February.
Chair, the board can direct me to have this. I will say that I would be remiss if I don't say that bandwidth-wise and what I need to produce in the next few weeks in response to the legislature, in response to the governor, in response to the board, while running the district and figuring out, again, vaccines and opening up more classrooms in a safe way, it, from my perspective, is not realistic. I'm going to have a hard time getting quality time on this in the way you're asking me to revisit it. And I want to do it is obviously put my due diligence in this and put a good framework together around what this framework of reorganization looks like, what our goals are, what we're headed to, and why we're designed the way we are. For me to have this done by the end of February essentially means I have about 2.5 weeks to work on this. I will be able to put a skeleton of a framework together, but to go deeper than that, it's going to be very difficult in that kind of time period. So respectfully, I ask you to reconsider the timeline you're asking me to produce this in. And if you're asking me and telling me that you want me to do this by the end of February, I will do the best I can to get a skeleton framework together. But that's about as deep as I can get. Right now, I have an additional process I need to manage in going back and doing the state level reviews with the school principals around the expectations that they did clearly have around protecting the classroom capacity and our diverse curriculum. And now we give them feedback. That's the work we have ahead of us that we said we were going to be doing over the next few weeks. On top of that, I have the good news of the additional funds from the governor's budget changes, which I will be working with those school principals and CASs around revisiting that piece. So I am short on bandwidth here in terms of trying to do all of this in the next 2 to 3 weeks in order to also stay on top of this budget process and help the legislature with their data and report demands and my own testimony demands around helping them with their process as well over these next few weeks. But I will take your direction.
Thank you, Sue. And I do recognize the challenges on what the department is facing, but again, we need to start this conversation sooner rather than later. We have been having this conversation for the last 3 committee meetings, I believe. So if it has to be an ever evolving process, then I think we just need to get on the same page sooner rather than later. So I think having some updates or maybe the plan, hopefully, or skeleton of a plan by February would be very helpful. I did see Board Member Bruce Voss's hand up, but he took it down. So just wanted to make sure that there's no final comments on this. Board Member Bruce Voss.
Thank you, Chair. I took it down because I realized the time, so I'll keep this really brief. I share the Chair's and Ken's desire for more operational efficiencies. I do want to underscore what the superintendent said. We do need to keep our eye on the ball here as to the critical issues, maybe the most important one for this next several months, getting our students back into the classroom in a safe manner. That is job one now. Second, it's very difficult for any business, including the DOE, to do long-term planning when you face a spread of several $100 million on the budget, and that's what we have. And the last point I want to make is I agree completely with Ken as to operational efficiencies on the administration level, but the reality of the way our budget is structured is the overwhelming chunk, more than 70% goes to schools through WSF, and it's managed by the schools, exclusively by the schools through their financial plans. And as we ask for reorganization, we need to be clear with the department. Are we asking them to effectively reprogram that structure and restructure that, or if we're only talking about administration? I yield, Chair.
Thank you, Board Member Bruce Voss. Is there any other comments? Okay, so if not, just to summarize, we will be scheduling a HR committee meeting in the 3rd Thursday of February and expect to see some sort of progress updates or reports. So with that, I'll move to the recommendation for action, which is item number 4 on the agenda, which is the committee action on the reorganization of the Office of Fiscal Services, Accounting Services Branch. I will now ask the board staff to call on any testifiers who have signed up to provide oral testimony on this agenda item.
Mahalo Committee Chair Takeno. Susan Picola Davis. Susan, can you hear me?
Can you hear me?
Yes, Susan, your testimony time begins now.
Hello. Boy, that was a long discussion. A very good discussion, though. As far as this reorganization of the Office of Fiscal Services and Accounting, I think this is a great example of the discussion that went on for a while. First of all, I'm abhorred by this proposal for reorganization because most often a reorganization decreases cost. This one actually increases costs by $9,100 for the new accounting director position and $5,500 for the new secretary 4 position. The administrative side of the DOE is increasing costs. As well put, actual increased costs will be dependent on the individuals selected to fill the new positions and their placement on the salary schedule. So it could be higher. And there was a 2019 peer review by the Council of Great City Schools that suggested that the DOE establish a controller level position. And I'm just going to say blah, blah, blah. And the question is, why did you wait until now, 2021, where we're in a budget crisis? I know I had 30 seconds left on the other one, so I'm just going to add that for the teachers that don't get misplaced or displaced, they will have survivor's guilt. You can look that up. The other thing that I have to say is that Chair Payne for the general business meeting, she found a way to fix a problem using resolutions. And when you use a resolution, you can be very directive and specific at what needs to be done. I suggest that this board go ahead and consider a process, put it in a resolution, and call it reorganization, whatever, and go ahead and put what you need the Department of Education to do. Because right now, as everybody has talked about, these budget cuts are left up to the CASs and the principals with no parameters. It's just like how the learning mode models were allowed some schools to open, blended learning, distance learning. Everybody is all over the place. The Department of Health keeps changing what they're saying. We need a resolution. We need a resolution based on the whole budget process if we need to get something that the board can actually get their teeth in and talk about. So that's probably all I have to say for this meeting. Thank you.
Committee Chair Takeno, that concludes oral testimony for this agenda item.
Thank you, Gina. We might receive written testimony on this agenda item, and if it is, it will be publicly posted on the board's website. With public testimony on this agenda item being concluded, we will move on to discussion. I would like to call upon again Assistant Superintendent Cindy Covell to present on this agenda item. Cindy, are you available?
Yes, Board Member Takeno, thank you very much. In light of the discussion we've had, I just want to say I think this is still a very important agenda item. And I do have Brian Hallett here with me who can speak to it from, it is his area that's looking at the reorg piece. And so I'm going to ask him to follow me with a couple of comments, Board Chair, if that's okay with you. Or Chair Takeno, yes, okay. So just, is that okay with you, Chair Takeno?
Yes, thank you. I had to unmute myself. Thank you.
So just a preface before Brian talks about this, in that this is a move toward efficiency for the Office of Fiscal Services. The accounting branch and the business ops branch will be two directors that report directly to the assistant superintendent. It is something that will provide greater detail and transparency in the fiscal and budget processes for everybody. And it has been, as we said, the Council of Great City Schools did note back in 2019 that it's too much in one person's area of purview to efficiently and effectively handle that team. So with the FMS modernization taking place, we need to concentrate these two particular directors under specific functional areas to be clearer about the efficiency and accountability of both of the branches. It is the Office of Fiscal Services, and Brian will probably talk to this, did take reductions with the program review, and this does not increase FTE at all. It provides him with 5 directors that report directly to him, which brings it into a much more efficient and accountable process for his office. So I would ask for your consideration in this move. It has been already consulted with the unions, and we received back that back. So we are okay to move forward if the board chooses to approve this today. Brian, I'm going to ask you to supplement the comments, please.
Assistant Superintendent Hallett, are you planning to speak now?
Yes, hi, thank you. I was just unmuting. Thank you for the opportunity to make some remarks on this agenda item. I appreciate that it's very difficult to take up an issue such as this in the current fiscal climate. As ASO Covell mentioned, the Office of Fiscal Services, we're looking forward, we're looking at 10% reduction of over $700,000 of cuts. Those are actions that would be taken at the same time that we're talking about implementing these changes. We are going from a 97 position count to an 89 position count for next year, and we still need these positions. What this reorg is doing or asking for is to repurpose existing positions into different positions. So we're taking a position out of my office to create a director position. We're taking a clerk out of accounting and making that the secretary position. We're taking an FTE for a permanent position from a third position in order to make this position permanent. And then we would intend to hold that position in my office, that office assistant that we're using the FTE for, open or not filling it until some future date and when the fiscal conditions change. So in reality, this is actually a net savings by making this change. And as mentioned, it would allow for greater capacity, greater transparency. The focus of our work in accounting has been largely on reporting transactions and reporting. I would expect that the next phase of work, we need to focus more externally and on transparency. And that is definitely an area that I would like additional help. We can't keep asking the same people to keep doing more and more. We need additional capacity in this area if we want what I think we all agree on from a strategic level is needed. So I described sort of how we're doing this and some of the why we're doing this, and I'd be very happy to answer any questions that you may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Assistant Superintendent Covell and Hallett. Before we start discussing this agenda item, I'd like to again remind committee members to raise your hands on WebEx and wait for me to call on you before unmuting your microphone. When you're done speaking, please lower your hand. the department recommends that the committee approve the reorganization of the Office of Fiscal Services, Accounting Services Branch, as described in Superintendent Christina Kishimoto's memorandum, as attached as attachment 3. May I get a motion to approve the recommendation? Board Member Chair Payne, Catherine Payne.
Thank you, Chair. This is Catherine Payne, and I move to approve this recommendation from the department.
Board Member Kaimana Bikarse.
Board Member Barkarsi, second the motion.
Okay, it's been moved by Board Member Catherine Payne and second by Board Member Kaimana Bikarse. Is there discussion? I'll take questions from the board now. Board Member Kenneth Uemura.
Thank you, Chair. As we all know, I had voiced my concerns on the previous discussion item 3A, Department Reorganization Plan. If this reorganization was presented as part of the entire reorganization plan, I would be more inclined to agree with the recommendation. However, since the plan is presented in isolation, and you are requesting that 2 positions be created from vacant positions, of course, knowing that you move some positions around, but those positions could also be viewed as cost savings to the department. And you also had increases in annual costs of $14,600 total for these 2 positions. I would not be in favor of approving the reorganization of the Office of Fiscal Services. The reorganization, I'm sorry, we cannot be looking at the plan in a vacuum without looking at the impact to the total reorganization plan. Because as you know, most of us that have gone through a reorganization, we know there are pluses and minuses. Some departments will have savings, and some departments you would build up, but the net overall should be a minus, so a savings. The fact is, the impact of the financial management system, the personnel and payroll, has not been considered in the restructuring. This is an example of the pluses and the minuses. Past experience says that there'd be efficiencies in bringing the system on board. Those efficiencies should be part of the restructuring conversation. So as a result, I will be voting no on this action item, or agreeing to defer this until we see the reorganization plan. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Board Member Uemura. Board Member Catherine Payne.
Thank you, Chair. I have concerns about not approving this. I would vote to approve it. I think that we ask a lot from our fiscal services for information, and we have a new AS over there that we've tasked with helping us to get better information more efficiently and effectively. They have done this. The intention is for them to better support the schools during this time, and fiscal concerns are great. They also have an accountability to the legislature and to the auditors. And although some of us have a lot of experience with accounting and the ancillary issues related to that, I think that it is important at some point that we trust the people that we have approved to be in charge of this, to come forth with a plan that has been developed within the assistant superintendent's department, and for us to just toss it out because we don't have a massive restructuring plan for the entire system to look at. I think this will just not only hamper their progress, but it will also impact morale within the department that has worked really hard on this. We are not doing the kinds of restructuring tasks. We don't tell them how to do it, but we ask them to come up with a better way of supporting schools, and they have done this. And for us to just tell them, no, it needs to be part of an entire system restructuring will not be a good thing, in my opinion. I yield.
Board Member Lynn Fallon.
Thank you, Chair Uemura, Lynn Fallon, board member. This kind of builds on our previous discussion around reorg. When I reviewed the reorg proposal, I assumed that it's pretty much in the last phases of going through the process. And so certain approvals have already been made. Is that correct? By the unions and others?
Yes,
So that's
that is
one
correct.
question.
Consult and
Right.
confer has occurred.
Right. And that is an arduous process, having gone through different reorg processes myself. But the proposal itself, building on what I had discussed earlier around what's missing for me, are general statements made about it's going to improve efficiency, customer service, and transparency on budget. So that triggered, so what kind of efficiency? Are you reducing time for approvals so that schools get approvals faster? Are you changing business processes so that certain approvals that are now required are no longer needed? So that's one kind of set of questions about clarity about what are the efficiencies around customers. Do you work directly with the complexes? Do you work directly with the schools? Who's your primary customer, and how does that relationship change now? I go back to just kind of clarifying the role of the state versus the role of the complex versus role of the schools. I brought that up many, many, many times. And in the budget hearing from WAM last week, this is an example. One of the members asked, well, we gave 15 positions. This wasn't about reorg. It was just about kind of use of resources. We gave 15 positions to, I believe, the complexes several sessions ago. What do they do? How has that made improvements in efficiency and effectiveness? I think that this is kind of some of the heart of what's missing when we look at the budget or when we make decisions. There are general statements made, but those statements need to be backed by some granular information and clarity about roles and exactly what the impact will be. Thank you. I yield.
Before we get any further responses from the department and further questions from board members, I'd just like to note that we are now at 11:33. We have just ran into, over half an hour into the FIC committee meeting. So what I'd like to do on this item is I would like to move this to the general board meeting without a recommendation so we can pick up further discussion on this topic during the general board meeting. So again, I'm just going to recommend that we push this out because of the fact that we are running way over our time limit. And I thank Chair Uemura and Vice Chair Voss for allowing the Human Resources Committee to go over. Is that okay with the board members? Any objections to that? Okay, if not, so from there, we do have the opportunity to allow members of the public who missed testifying earlier to testify now, including those who signed up or were not in attendance, had technical difficulties, or signed up late. Members of the public who signed up to testify, you must be logged on to WebEx using the same name you used to sign up for testimony. Board staff will call on you in the order in which you signed up to present oral testimony Board staff will unmute your mic. Please test your speakers and microphone before your name is called to ensure they are working. Instructions on how to do so can be found on the board's website. If you're not audible, because of technical issues, you'll be muted and the next testifier will be called. Note that each individual may testify on a particular agenda item only once. If you are signed up to testify multiple times on the same agenda item, your name will not be called. Testifiers will have a 4-minute time limit. Please state your name, organization, and agenda item you're testifying on. A chime will sound when you have 30 seconds left and a second chime when your testimony time expires. You'll be automatically muted once your allotted time for testimony expires. I now ask board staff to call on any remaining testifiers if they are.
Committee Chair Takeno, there are no additional testifiers at this time.
Thank you, Gina. Since there are no public testimony or further business on this agenda, this meeting is adjourned at 11:36 a.m. The FIC committee will be starting in approximately 50 minutes or roughly around 11:50 a.m. Thank you all for your attendance and participation in today's Human Resources Committee meeting. This meeting is adjourned. Thank you.